Okay, why don't we get started?
Okay.
Steve just returned from a 4-week trip to and around Alaska. He will share his experience today. He took thousands of pictures, but don't worry, he only will share a few today.
All right. I ask everyone to close your eyes. That means you. Now, imagine the sound of an ice cube crackling when you put it in a hot drink. Now magnify that 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. You are hearing the ice crackling around you in front of the Holgate Glacier in Kenai Fjords National Park, Alaska. Now quick, open your eyes, because you just heard a sharp crack and you want to quickly look to see where a block of ice is going to go pluck into the ocean. First slide. This is the Holgate Glacier, one of the places that I was at during my 4-week trip. And I want to share with you some of the breathtaking moments that I had. Someone said, and it's been attributed to different people, that life should not be measured by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away. My 4-week trip to Alaska took so many breaths away from me that I was at danger of having an asthma attack. I never got tired of breathless moments, and I can hope to share with you only a few of them today. To get a handle around Alaska and its neighbor, Yukon, part of Canada, think in terms of their slogans. Alaska calls itself the last frontier, and Yukon, larger than life. They're both true. So you have in front of you this gorgeous, huge glacier. Next slide. There's a close-up of the top of the glacier. It's roughly a mile wide and several hundred feet high. It's coming down from a huge ice field, one of the largest in North America. Next slide. And I should mention that every photograph and video clip that I will show you, I took. There's nothing from National Geographic, nothing from the internet. And all I did in Photoshop was adjust the lighting, because sometimes the lighting was quite tricky. These glacier shots illustrate the big. Next slide. Scott, you should be able to just hit forward in your photo viewer and go straight to the next one, instead of having to keep opening. This is a similar glacier, different vantage point. Next. Next. Same one. Now you're not hitting. Okay, the image that will come up when the computer, there we go. Big not only refers to glaciers, go back to the moose, but it applies to certain animals. Do you know that the largest land animal in North America is the grizzly, but the most dangerous is the moose? More people die from moose encounters than with grizzly encounters. Indeed, I had 2 near moose encounters on my trip. The official Alaska highway starts in Dawson Creek, Alberta, which is 1,380 miles from Idaho Falls. That is the start of the 1,422-mile Alaska highway. 2 miles outside Dawson Creek, there's a sign, one of these warning signs that illustrates moose crossing. And sure enough, right after the sign, a moose jumps out on the left side of the road and almost hits the car in front of me. The car veers one way, the moose veers the other way. Everyone's happy. Steve is shocked and now believes that the moose crossing sign is for a good reason. This particular moose was in Denali National Park. Next slide. Well, I don't know what viewer you're using, Scott. If you click on the right side of the screen, it should go to the next one. There you go. These are grizzlies, also in Denali National Park. It is a mama grizzly and her 2 cubs taken with a telephoto lens. Next picture. Click on the right side of the image and it should go. But there's also the small. This is a picture of fireweed, which is the provincial or the territorial flower of the Yukon, and it is everywhere. There's a very similar photo of flower in Alaska. Next slide. I took both the big and the small. That's a Alaskan flower, wildflower. Next. And of course, we have the small animals. This is a small ground squirrel in Denali National Park who was not at all scared of the traffic on the highway that goes into the park. Probably because only the first 13 miles of that park road are accessible to the public. Beyond that, you have to be in a bus. And so shortly after this picture, I went and did exactly that. Next picture. So Nancy, you've seen some of the big, some of the small.
And when I think of Alaska, there's certainly lots of big glaciers and such with huge amounts coming, breaking off. Did you tell me about that, or tell me about Alaska's size?
Well, Alaska is, of course, 3 times the size of Texas. And there was a Facebook discussion. Someone had said, some of my friends were talking about the size of Texas over the time period I was up there, and I just simply responded with the single word, Alaska. The glaciers are huge. The size of the road is huge. You drive for days and days to get from anywhere to anywhere, it seems like in the Yukon and Alaska. Being patient is a requirement because you can't get anywhere quickly in Alaska. The image that Scott's pulled up here are some mountain goats off in the distance. Those white dots are each a goat. Next slide.
Oh, okay. Well, it sounds like you would need to slow down once you get there, just to see everything and to feel the pace of the environment. Is that true?
It's very true. I would sometimes tell myself that I wanted to get to some location in 1 or more hours, but I kept having these breathless moments. And I'd stop the car and take a picture, and stop a car and walk out to see something, or stop a car and take a hike. And then I'd say, okay, I'm going to pass up the next opportunities. And then I'd go around the next curve and there would be another breathless moment. So I did not make very good timing, but I had a lot of those breathless moments.
How about, it seems like, you're in the wilderness and it's quiet, and yet how loud is the cracking of the glaciers?
The cracking of glaciers, I tried to find a video clip. I took several video clips in front of the glacier, and I tried to find one that I could show with you today. The wind was sufficiently high that between the wind and the crackling, you can't quite make out a realistic representation of the sound. Suffice to say that it was difficult to hear people speak between the wind and the crackling of the sound. Next slide. Another loud sound. Okay, we're, I think, out of sequence, so I'll speak to this in a moment. Another loud sound was that of sea lions and birds. As we were leaving the Seward Bay toward the national park, we passed one particular island where it was, again, hard to hear people speak. Some of the animals are very fast and surprise you. Coming between the Mendenhall Glacier Discovery Center and the parking lot of that Discovery Center, I almost walked into the mama bear that was just on the screen. This is a picture more at a distance. And only after I fortunately stopped, there's the cub, did I realize that not only did the mama bear just pass in front of my eyes, but even more important was 2 cubs. And 3 of us that were walking down the path, we therefore almost committed suicide by bear, by walking between mama bear and cubs. Next slide. This family of bears were not at all scared of humans. There's a picture of mama bear and her 2 cubs. You'll note a human standing very, very close to said bears. That apparently is not all that unusual in Alaska. You just have to be always aware that something interesting might come walking your way. Next slide.
Steve, in this interview, can we ask questions? I thought you said we could.
Fine with me.
Is that a black bear? It looks, I don't see a hump.
It looks to me like, yes. So you have the quick, you have the slow. This is another glacier. Scott, you're having trouble staying on one picture. Go back to the glacier, please. So that's a very peaceful picture. And unlike the other glaciers, there was nothing, you can see this particular glacier, it's not reaching down to the water. It's not caving, it's not dropping into the sea. This was a particularly calm and peaceful moment.
So it sounds like you had a happy trip. Was it for you?
It was very joyful. Next slide might illustrate that. Yep, this is another loud picture. Go ahead, next one. Those are the sea lions and birds.
Talking about birds, I hear Alaska has lots of eagles.
It has a huge number of eagles. All right, this is another loud picture. These are totally out of sequence. Next picture. This is a glacier along the Glen Highway, which stretches from Anchorage up to Tok, Alaska, which is one of the most beautiful drives I've been on. Nothing against going to the Sun Highway in Glacier National Park, or the Banff Jasper Road, or indeed the road that goes up through Tetons and Yellowstone. But Alaska beats all of the above, in my opinion. This is one of them. The Alaska Highway is in a class by itself at the top of the list. Next slide. This is also well, Matusa is my pronunciation, but I'm sure it's wrong. Glacier along the Glen Highway. It's remarkable in that parts of the glacier have now become still. So the main glacier is still flowing, but there are pieces off to the left, if you look closely in this image, that are no longer moving, and they will eventually melt and become meltwater lakes. But for now, they're just chunks of ice off the main flow. Next slide. This is the Telson Wildlife Preserve in eastern Alaska. Those of us who live in eastern Idaho may sometimes wonder where our trumpeter swans go when they're not with us. This is the answer. They come up to this national reserve in Alaska. And I kept looking for them, but I think they were down still in Idaho this time of year. But it was a very beautiful, scenic, and very quiet, peaceful spot. Next slide. Another image of the same place. Note how still that lake is. You can see the reflection of the forest and indeed of the distant mountains. This is taken in early afternoon, and yet the lake is still so calm, so peaceful. Next slide. More mountains, but note here the fireweed in the foreground. This picture is along the Haines Highway from Haines Junction, Yukon, down to Haines, Alaska, which is where I caught a ferry on the way home. Next slide. More fireweed with a distant glacier. So you see the big and the small.
I hear there's lots of bald eagles there.
There are bald eagles, and now we'll see random number generate. We'll see whether it's eagles come up next on the images. Ready? Yeah. Another piece. This is along the Alaska Highway outside Telson, Yukon. Next slide. The eagles are in here somewhere. And they were not hiding even from me. Yeah, this is along the Alaska Highway. Next slide. All right, a digression. We'll get back to the eagles. In Wasilla, Alaska, we find the headquarters of the Iditarod race. Well, sled dogs, and I visited there, and that's where this is taken from. Sled dogs have to undergo practice and training year round. Well, one of the things they do when snow's not on the ground, even in Alaska, is they hook up the dogs and have them pull different vehicles. In this case, they're pulling me. Next slide. So you get a chance to get an experience of what being pulled by dogs is like. Next slide, Scott. At least I hope it's the next slide. Yeah, this is the looking at the business end of the dogs as they're pulling me through the path. Obviously not exactly in the wintertime, but it was a bit chilly that day. Next slide. One of the things we did in the joy category I and other people that I found myself visiting with was zip lining. So now, Scott, if you could play one of the 3 video clips that is in that package. This is a still of the zip line, one of the zips in Talkeetna, Alaska, which had we had better weather that day, we could have seen Denali from a good distance away. But I was focused on enjoying the zipping. And we'll see whether we can play any zip files here for it. I mean, video clip files. Ah, there's one. Except that, there we go. Oh, you're not hearing it. So there's a woman who is coming in for a landing. Much, much slower than real life. So we must be taxing Scott's computer. It was quite safe. As an old safety engineer, I think I actually have some credibility in saying that was safe. It was a blast. And one of the more joyful things that I did. Maybe it'll...
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to try this again and see if you can hear the sound, because I heard it just fine. See if y'all can hear the sound now.
You're doing fine.
Were you able to hear it that time?
Not really. I know what it's supposed to sound like. But go to the next clip. I did 3 zips over the last 6 weeks. One that you just saw in Alaska. This one is at High C Hot Springs. I think this is the one at High C Hot Springs. Nope, this is in Jasper.
Ready?
This is a some arrangements.
Good. Quicker with each step. A comfortable pace for you. Yeah. And we'll have to view that. Woo! Whoa! Woo!
That's my landing instructor.
Very nice.
Wow. Wow. Indeed. A nice superhero. You gotcha.
When you're zipping, you follow instructions.
The feet up still. There we go. And closer coming down. Very nice. And gentle on them.
I love it.
Great.
What they is they take my cell phone, my left palm of my hand, so that as I was flying, the video jerks around a bit, but you're seeing where my hand can point to. And then if you could play the last clip, which is from High C.
Okay, were you able to hear that last one okay?
Yes.
Sort of. That's as good as we're going to do, and let's keep moving. You can't quite hear the sound all that well. It's playing, so it's a lot of time, but you can at least see the smile on my face. So I had joyful times. So back to the still pictures.
Did that not come up?
You've got probably too many photographs open at the same time. I don't know why. But there was also the sad. And the image you see on the screen is a monument in Juneau. That is emblematic of a empty folded chair. It's because of 1942, the high school in Juneau, the valedictorian that should have addressed the high school commencement was John Tanaka, a Japanese American. And instead of attending his own high school graduation and giving the valedictorian speech, he and his family had been taken because they were Japanese Americans. And that is why we see in this picture an empty chair. And unfortunately, there's an Idaho connection because John and his family ended up in the Minidoka relocation camp in Idaho. An Alaska-Idaho connection that I had no idea existed and certainly wish did not. Next slide. Another sad but slightly less pointless than the preceding one is in Alaska, instead of simply flowers or a cross on the roadside where someone has been killed while driving, in Alaska you see signs like this picture where presumably at the agreement of the family you see signs that say please drive safely. And then under it, in memory of some loved one, some of the signs will say please don't drink and drive, or please wear a seatbelt. So they're giving a message, and it is very powerful. Instead of seeing simply a memorial, it's a memorial and a message. Next slide, Scott. You see the majestic animals. This is a bighorn sheep. Taken not too far from where I was standing. That was not a very high telephoto image. Next picture. And finally, we have eagles. These are two eagles that were hanging out in Seward Bay as the boat was taking off. Next slide. And I think they were posing for us. Here they decided to look at us as the boat is passing by. And just enjoying a not too warm, not too cold, sunny day in Alaska. Next picture. Here is an eagle flying above a bunch of other birds in a reserve, a game reserve north of Juneau. Next slide.
Well, that didn't work.
Well, now we're back to the bears.
No.
That's lovely.
One of the things that I don't think I have a picture of it here is at that eagle reserve, I saw, and I have a series of stills where the eagle has come upon a different bird of prey who was eating something, and the eagle decided that it wanted whatever the other bird had, probably a smaller hawk. So the eagle honed in on the hawk's action and took it away. And the hawk kind of stared for a while, for a few seconds, and then decided it was the loser, and it flew away empty-handed, or empty talon. Next slide. In the national park there off Seward, one of the many animals we saw were orcas. And this is one of many orcas that seemed unafraid of our boat. Next slide is a close-up of this. And what you could see out at the distance is spray coming up from the whale. And if we were lucky, then they'd come above water long enough to take images. And I'll tell you, a whole bunch of humans watched a whole bunch of orcas that day. It was quite fascinating. Next slide. And we have the smaller animals. This is a fox along the Glen Highway, excuse me, the Haines Highway, near the Alaska-Canadian border. And I just spotted a car in front of me and a guy with a very long lens pointing at what looked like dirt. So I decided I better stop and see what he was pointing at. And the answer was this fox that was just hanging out. And I think the fox was posing after a while. Next slide. And the last image I'll share with you is in Seward Bay, this sea otter just relaxing himself. And indeed, the best bumper sticker I saw the whole 4 weeks, 6,600 miles. It's a bumper sticker I saw in Alaska, and it said, "Relax, we're not in the lower 48." And that so symbolizes life in Alaska. It's a huge state. It's a beautiful state. Wonderful people. No road trash that I saw. And the people have adapted to the climate, to the huge distances, and seem to enjoy life. Any questions, Madam Interviewer?
Any last thoughts?
I just had a blast, and if you have not made it to our 49th state, let me strongly recommend. I have seen now actually 31 countries, and the two most beautiful places on the planet that I have seen is Iguazu Falls in Brazil and Kenai Fjords National Park, Alaska. The tropical paradise with the waterfall and the very chilly but beautiful fjords and glaciers and wildlife in Alaska. So the cold and the hot. And I just lack the words to describe how wonderful Alaska can be. And if you have the chance and the time to drive up through the Yukon, do that too.
Thank you, Steve. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Steve.